Accomplishment Coaching is proud to present the following fine programming. Accomplishment Coaching, where coaches lead and leaders coach. AccomplishmentCoaching.com.
Welcome to the Coaching Show with your host, Master Certified Coach Christopher McAuliffe.
Thank you, Dick Warren, and thank you, dear listener, for joining us for another exciting edition of the Coaching Show. My name is Christopher McAuliffe, Master Certified Coach, because you have to say it that way. Today with a super special guest star, not only an extraordinary coach in his own right, but a recent refugee from Florida, where he was. What were you, trapped? That's the dulcet tones of Craig Cassie joining us today. Hello, sir.
Hello. I was stranded. I was abandoned by American Airlines. So what was a magical vacation for 3 days turned into a test of my mindfulness and my patience and my willingness to surrender to life's design at the airport hotel.
At the airport. Maybe I'm just stoned at the nail salon, or maybe I'm stuck at the airport hotel. Let's talk about this. So you went down for a magical vacation in where?
Oh, Walt Disney World. It was I take the last week off every month, and my partner surprise gifted me a trip to Disney World. So found out Thursday morning, I was hopping on a plane by noon, and by Thursday night, we were already there.
That is so extra points to your sweetheart. Amazing, nice job, and their timing was impeccable. So then you enjoyed 3 days of fun and frolic in that one of the happiest places on earth.
Food,
trademark.
fun, children.
Yeah, lots of humans, and then you get ready to go. And what happens?
They delay our flight. We find out that 1,000 flights are canceled. In our optimism, we go to the airport, as one does, because we assume it will be safe. And then we're found out that we have no flight for 3 days. So my partner and I take our 5 minutes to process our emotions. I go on angry cardio walks. I don't know about you, but when I'm feeling kind of pissed off, it helps to move my body. So I stormed around the airport with some sunglasses on so people would not be offended by my face. And then we just made the best of it. We got face masks, some spa materials, got a nice hotel room, and just really treated ourselves as best as we could for being in Orlando in the Hyatt Hotel for the night.
Now, I noticed that you did not go back to the happiest place on earth. You did not go back to expand on your Disney experience.
No, we were sufficiently fulfilled after doing 3 parks in 2 days, all day long. But the beauty of the internet is, at least during COVID, I don't know what your social circles were like, but I met a lot of new friends on Twitter and just, posting coaching content, talking about life online. Turns out a lot of them live in Orlando. So I, lit the signal flares, posted on Twitter that I'm stuck in Orlando, who's around to hang out. And out of the woodwork came a couple dozen people. So we ended up just traveling around, playing darts, shooting pool, grabbing dinners and margaritas. So it was not bad. It's nice to meet internet friends in real life.
Wow. There's so much wrong with that sentence for me, because I don't enjoy the people. I don't like the posting, and meeting strangers, staying in airport hotels. There's just a lot. I'm learning how insular and set in my ways I am. Thank you so much. All right. By the way, if people do want to become your internet friends, how do they find you? Where are you?
Definitely. You can find me on Instagram, where I post daily about relationships and coaching. The handle is at Craig, Craig, Cassie, Cassey, Jr., Jr. Or you can find me on my website, craigcassey.com, CraigCassey.
Great. Well, I'm very grateful for you to be here, and thanks for sharing your tale of woe with us. I'm very, very delighted to have our first guest with us today. I've wanted to find out more about the Neuro Leadership Institute for some time. Patricio Ramal is the Director of Education for North America, a facilitator with the Neuro Leadership Institute. Got more than 24 years of combined experience in consulting, leadership, and management in highly demanding and performance-driven organizations. He's worked in the corporate world for such organizations as Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola, Saatchi & Saatchi, and lots of different countries. He's also was originally in a part-time faculty position when he was a young man at the age of 24 in top universities in the United States, including Parsons School of Design and schools in Mexico and Puerto Rico that I won't offend people by trying to pronounce. Certified in the foundations of neuro leadership, brain-based coaching, and being a facilitator across the world in the United States, Mexico, and South America. We're delighted to welcome to our microphones for the first time, Patricio Ramal. Hello.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Christopher. And Craig, I can relate to your story. Well, first time I coming through clearly and audibly. Yes, awesome.
Little bit faint for me, but I'm an older person than Craig.
I was stranded in not in a trip not long ago, and the airline was American Airlines, but I have to give like credit to them because it wasn't their fault. It was the syndicate of teachers in Oaxaca. They decided to take over the airport.
Wow.
And we couldn't get out. We actually had to get somebody to drive us to Mexico City from Oaxaca, so that we can then reroute our flights out of Oaxaca from Mexico City. So it's one of those adventures in Mexico. But if you've ever been there, you learn to expect the unexpected.
I think that you're so generous, both of you, in your experience, because I would be blaming, I would be yelling, I would be making everybody wrong, and so I can see that I have some work to do. A lot of brain-based coaching came to us first through the writings of David Rock. Are you familiar with that, Patricio?
Definitely. The institute was founded out of the coaching space. So we are the Neuro Leadership Institute. We're a 23-year organization by now. So it was founded in 1998, and it was born as a coaching organization through this brain-based coaching program. It used to be Results Coaching System not long ago, and it evolved since then to just be a really brain-based approach to coaching, which is sort of David Rock's child, and David and Lisa Rock, the co-founders of the company.
And where have you taken it from there? I mean, that's some foundational work that was done, and I assume very important. But tell us about the I'm going to learn to say it sooner or later. Neuro Leadership Institute's work these days.
Yeah. I also find it hard to it doesn't roll off my tongue as easily. And so we're now evolved to what we call the science-based consultancy firm. And the vision overall is making organizations more humans through science. And so as David is started exploring sort of the organizational development space and the human development space, starting to look at, well, what are those foundations that we can use to sort of understand human behavior in a different way? He started sort of looking at science and looking at research and looking at different fields. And that's when, maybe in the late 90s, neuroscience started to emerge as a little bit more of a field due to the advances in technology. So we were now able to look at the brain. And so the Institute has evolved from there to really, help organizations with talent strategies across many realms, but just always having that science backing. And so in a lot of the challenges, we like to say that we solve organizational people challenges. And so in a lot of those challenges, when we look at industries or challenges that we haven't been able to solve in many, many years, we always have this assumption, well, something's wrong, maybe all the way back to the biological level. And so we deconstruct the issues all the way back to, well, how does the brain actually work when, it's faced with bias? Or how does it work when it's actually trying to get to insight? Or how does the brain work when it's trying to, have a more impactful conversation, whatever that might be, and then rebuild the strategies from the biology. And so that's what we've been doing for probably the last 7 to 8 years, that we've sort of shifted from just coaching to more of a science-based consultancy. Does that make sense?
Patricio, completely. At least for me. Christopher, you can put in if you're not tracking along. But Patricio, you mentioned how the brain works with bias and how you as an organization support that. And one of the stands, it sounds like your organization takes, is helping people master inclusion. or the habits of inclusion or the work of inclusion, which in today's world, DEI is evolving. I think many of us are still actually grasping at just what can it look like, does it mean? So from your perspective, what really is inclusion and how do we do it from a brain-based coaching perspective?
Yeah, DEI is one of our fastest growing areas, as you can imagine, due to not only just recent events, but really around how we've been approaching this. And the first time we looked at bias, we actually got it wrong. We developed a model that was trying to codify all of the biases, right? And if you look at any research out there, you might find anywhere from 100 to 200 different biases. And so we're trying to say, like, this is just too complex to be able to say, learn these biases and then try not to do them, right? And so we took a stab at trying to help the whole bias and inclusion field from a bias mitigation perspective, right? Because our approach around what we do is just around behavior change, right? If you can't get people to change their behavior, then really nothing's possible with an organization change. So you really have to look at what are the habits that are driving the behaviors. And so when we looked at bias, the big insight around bias that allowed us to develop a model that's actually helping mitigate bias is that bias is an unconscious process in the brain, right? And different biases work differently in the brain. So while you might be able to mitigate one with certain strategy, that strategy is going to be completely ineffective in mitigating other categories. And so when we went back to look at how does unconscious bias operate in the brain, then we were able to say, oh, these are the structures that are related to the different types of biases, and then you can actually work to mitigate. But we use a common phrase that is, if you have a brain, you have bias, right? It's just an inherent part of how the brain works. And if you read, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, that's sort of the work that sprung all of this thinking around. Your brain is great at categorizing because that's how it survives best and is able to navigate the world really, really efficiently.
I mean, that might be the bumper sticker for today's podcast. If you have a brain, you have bias. And when I hear bias, I think I first go to the DEI space, but I also imagine working in these bigger corporations who are also really striving for impact. There are probably biases around what opportunities or what leaps they're willing to take in changing marketplaces and whatnot. So from your organizational perspective, what are some of those conversations that enable these companies to meet their bias and pivot in a way that's actually more in alignment with their success, their initiatives, all of it?
Definitely. The work many organizations have started with is really around the business case of diversity and inclusion and what the impact of that is. And so as research has become more available in terms of it's really good business sense, right? It's not just the right thing to do, but it's also good business sense. And so when companies have looked at those two things, it's like, okay, some companies say we want to do the right thing, and some companies say, oh no, we want to improve our bottom line, whether through innovation, through creativity, whatever that might be, because diversity impacts in many different realms. Then they're saying, okay, well, how do I do that? And then what has been really helpful in opening the conversation is this non-judgmental approach to bias in terms of, well, that's your brain, right? And so when you start telling people, if you have a brain, you have bias, and people start to understand the research around that, then all of the guardrails around I'm a bad person, I'm a biased person, whatever, come down, and you're allowed to have a better conversation around this is just part of being human. Like that's the fact that you're going to make decisions based on your biases on like maybe 90% of your decisions. It's a great thing, right? That's a great thing because that's what allows you to navigate your world in the most seamless way possible. Now there's going to be 10% of your decisions, maybe, that then you do need to stop to check for bias, right? It's not all of the decisions that, and so having this conversation around bias isn't bad. Bias is a thing that just we operate on. It's about the decision making that's important. And when those decisions have a long tail, then you might want to, think about stopping and checking for biases.
You're going to follow up, Mr. Cassie, or shall I jump in?
Go for it.
There's so much deliciousness in that, especially the good business and doing the right thing. I'm wanting to go back, though, to a little more basic question, if that's okay, Patricio.
Of course.
The audience for us is mostly coaches, right? And you came right out and said, "Hey, we're a science-based consultancy firm." Will you elaborate a little bit more on how coaching works with the work you do at NLI, at the Neuro Leader? I'm just never going to do it. We're just going to call it NLI, which stands for Neuro Leadership Institute. I could say it. There we go. How does coaching work, and how do you relate to coaching inside of your consultancy?
That is an awesome question. And I only realized this a few years after working in the organization, because I saw how our coaching methodology sort of seeps into everything that we do. We actually don't call our consultancy service, we call them thinking partnerships. And the reason we call them thinking partnerships is because we use this brain-based approach to insight in the way that we work with clients. So ultimately, the core of our coaching method is, how do we give the coaches a process that aids in creating insight for the coachee? It's all about mining for insight. And it's exactly the same thing that we do with organizations. We want to bring our science expertise and our sort of methodology expertise, but there's no way that we're ever going to be an expert on the organization, right? They're the experts on their organization. They're the experts on their culture. And what we do is mine what is already in their brain, and it's already their knowledge. And we just, through this thinking partnership process, we create insight for them. And there's I can get into like a whole explanation of why insight is so important, but that's basically, if you look at our coaching part, and if you look at our thinking partnership part, is what are the insights that are coming out of this conversation?
So is it important, do you think, for your team, or for maybe consultants generally, to have, or thinking partners, which I definitely need one of, to have coach training, to have coaching skills?
All of our employees take our brain-based conversation skills or brain-based coaching certificate program, yes, because it's about learning to create the space where insight can happen. Because you can unconsciously, or just by your own previous methods, whatever, interfere with actually how does the brain create insight. And so if you look at the methodology, it's really about just how to create conditions for insight in the brain.
Patricio, I am loving this first off, and I'm so curious. So background's ontological coaching. My scientific background, I studied positive psychology and taught it for 5 years. And one thing I'm really curious about is what is the difference as you see it from the neuro side of coaching compared to these other ones, and what is some of the gems that we might want to get as coaches who could look for further education in the work that y'all do?
Definitely. The difference is the focus, the focus that the coach places on the process and all of the different. So we have some theoretical foundations that are going to help the coach understand, well, why does the brain need these conditions for insight? And so we talk a lot about the brain's organizing principle and threat and reward and those type of things. And then we use, you probably heard this from David Rock, the SCARF model, which identifies social domains that unconsciously create threat or reward, et cetera. So once you have those theoretical foundations, then really our focus is just, what are those skills that you need that create the space for the brain to have insight? In a lot of ways, I don't know if I can say this on the podcast. I'll use another word, but I call it the oh crap moment. Instead of using the S word, I'll just call it the oh crap moment.
Hey,
Because
there's no need for that kind of language, mister.
because a lot of what happens in our programs, and you sit there and it's very counterintuitive the way we do the coaching, because you don't ask about the problem. In fact, the less you know about the person's problem, the more you're able to focus on process and really get them to think and create the space for insight. And so when you sit back and you're looking at this methodology, saying like, this just doesn't really, I don't know how this could ever work if I don't know anything about the problem, right? I need some details about these problems that my coaching has. But when you sort of trust the process and then you realize that it's so effective at creating insight, it happened to me and a lot of people that I've talked to in our programs, there's always this oh crap moment where it's like, I've been doing this wrong for however many years. So for me, it was like, oh, I've been doing this wrong for 15 years, right? I was like, it was that mind blowing. And you sort of get that moment where it's like, oh. And then you build back from there and you start thinking, it's not about the problem. It's not about me. It's about the other person in the process. And so it's a mindset shift.
Do you have a follow-up, Craig, or you want me to grab it?
You can grab it. I mean, I'm just checking out the SCARF model, and what really hits me over here about it is we talk, at least in the ICF coaching world, about the importance of holding space and the impact of being. And this sounds like a whole nother approach to it. And when people, new coaches especially, hear about what it means to show up with the being of a coach, sometimes it feels very out there. What does that mean? A lot of our performance contexts are turned on and we're trying to act like a coach. This sounds like a really scientifically grounded way to actually understand how to create space for someone to be coached, to lean into their own process, their own mastery. And if anything, it feels like we get to really take our hands off the steering wheel with permission from the SCARF method.
Definitely. That's, I think, in a way, you're working because, well, I'm not going to be doing anything. A lot of the coaches get that initial reaction like, well, if I use this, I'm not going to be doing anything. And no, I mean, you're actually working really hard, but on a different thing. So you're not working hard on trying to solve the coach's problem or advise them or, use some of these quagestions that we call them, like questions dressed up as suggestions, right? You're asking these quagestions. No, you're actually focusing on the process, and you're working hard at that because your brain is going to try to reorient you towards that problem solution mindset, right? And so you are working hard. It's just that you're working hard on as a coach on a different realm, which is what you said, like holding that space where the thinking can happen.
Well, if everybody doesn't steal quagestions immediately, that's the best thing I've heard in a long time. Quagestions, nice. All right, so people who are trained with you have this experience, this oh crap moment of, oh, I've been doing it wrong all this time, right? Because we've been trying to solve people's problems or get in there with more details or something and not creating the space for their own insights. Am I picking up what you're laying down?
That's it. That's perfect.
Okay, so tell us this. Coaches around the world are currently listening, or at least 3, and I want to know what we're doing wrong. If you could wave your magic wand based on the information and training that you've done and have us all as coaches stop doing something or start doing something else, what's the first thing you'd have us do, take on or leave behind in our approach?
I think it's that is that problem solution model. So we have a little framework that we call the TAPS model, and the TAPS model is just a representation of like the 2x2 axes. So it's
everybody's got one. Yeah,
exactly, like tell, ask, problem, solution, right? So like on the vertical, you'll have tell, ask, and then problem, solution. And on the bottom left quadrant, you have that tell, solution piece, right? And so that ask, that's that tell and the problem, solution, right? And so you're telling them things about the problem rather than asking about the solutions, right? And so the first thing we always teach our coaches is you need to learn when to shift into a coaching conversation. So when you're going to switch to the ask solutions quadrant of the model, because you're going to be asking about solutions, because that is what actually helps create the space for thinking. And so there's two really quick questions that we use there to get you into knowing when you need a coaching conversation more than telling people what to do. And one of them is this an emotionally charged topic for you? Right? As soon as this is an emotionally charged topic, you might start thinking like, okay, this might be more of a coaching conversation than I'm going to tell you what to do. And then the second one is there more than one solution? Right? Because if somebody asks you for the combination of the locker, you're not going to coach them into a conversation, into a combination. But if they ask you, I don't know about, go about this, strategy for my business. I'm trying to increase revenue and I don't know about this strategy. And so that can have many, many different solutions. And it actually might be a very emotionally charged topic because he might be an entrepreneur who's struggling with his finances, right? And so as soon as you hear those two things, and then the third one is around responsibility. Like who needs to own the actions coming out of this? And if it's the coachee who needs to own that, then you're definitely in a coaching conversation completely. And so as soon as you transition to that quadrant, then you forget about the problem, you forget about the details of the problem, and you start going into thinking questions, right? Like, what is your thinking process? Because our definition of coaching is facilitate positive change by improving people's thinking. That's how we define coaching. You're facilitating change by focusing on how people, not what they're thinking, but how they are thinking.
And this really lends itself to agility, is what I'm hearing. It sounds like a lot of people, you have a, professional partner who comes in for a meeting, relates to themselves as having a problem. And if we just spoke to that problem, they might not create the same kind of progress or growth compared to using your model, which is really how can we shift their brain, their approach, so that no matter what other problems come down the pipeline, they're actually going to be better off.
There's an interesting paradox with insight, because one of the conditions for insight is not thinking directly about the problem. And we use this analogy a lot in terms of like, when do you have your best ideas? I know Christopher, correct? Like if you have an example of like when good ideas pop in your head.
At the airport in Orlando, clearly.
Right, a lot of people, at the shower, running, driving, sleeping is a very calm. And so what happens is the focus on problem, because problems are threats, creates noise in the brain. And as soon as you create noise in the brain, you start moving away from the conditions for insight. And so the problem focused approach is always noisy for the brain. And so you don't allow the space to, but it's very counterintuitive, right? It's very paradoxical. Like, how am I going to solve a problem if I'm not thinking directly about the problem? Well, you've done it all your life. Like those are the insights that you have in the shower. Those are the insights that you have while driving. Those are the insights you have in a random conversation with your spouse or with your kids. All of a sudden, that's what we call the aha moment. It's like, oh. And you were miles away from maybe that business strategy that you were trying to solve so intently an hour before, right?
It's such a, it's so interesting because it's so resonant, right? We've all had those. We're not doing anything at all, playing a game or something, and then all of a sudden the aha moment comes. Do you feel like you have techniques or approaches that create those, or are they still more or less gifts from the universe, right? Or completely unpredictable moments? Or is there some way I can dial this in if I take the right supplements or, do the right handstand in yoga or something?
There's actually a lot of science behind this. And that's why this methodology can be so effective, because there are 4 conditions that create insight in the brain. So one of them is not, the one I just talked about is not about the, not thinking directly about the problem, but it has to be slightly positive. So if you think about that threat reward space, you can't be too excited, because on both of the spectrums of the threat and reward, you make back decisions, right? If you're in a threat state, you're going to make bad decisions. But if you're in a reward state, say you're winning at blackjack in Vegas and you're completely excited, you're going to make bad decisions there as well. And
and I have, Craig.
I think
what he's telling you is calm down. That's what he's telling you.
And then you're excited that you think you figured out the game, and then 30 minutes later you're broke again, right? Because so at the both ends of the spectrum, we make bad decisions. So you have to be sort of neutral, slightly positive. The brain has to be inward looking. And so it's those sort of reflection moments, daydreaming, that type of thing. And then it has to be quiet. So it's quiet, inward looking, not focusing directly on the problem, and then slightly neutral to positive. And so we use what we call the dance of insight. We have a little process where through a series of steps, and that's why we call it the dance. It's a little cheesy, but bear with me here. Through those little steps, you start creating the space where the brain starts to be quiet. The brain starts to, look in. You'll see it on the coach's reaction, right? You'll see it when you ask the question, their eyes will go sort of back and up or down. And then you see that. So we have a little model there, the faces of insight. So you can actually see the moment a person has an insight. And so by using the dance of insight through this sort of repeated process, you're able to create those conditions for people where it's a lot more likely that they'll have an insight. And so, yeah, you can create those conditions for yourself, Christopher. Definitely.
Thanks. I can see Craig trying to calm himself down right now. I can see that. What do you got, man?
First off, love to dance and love the idea of faces of insight. I imagine, do you remember growing up those emotional face charts we all seem to have in school? This is the angry face. This is the happy face. This is the apathetic, I want food face. I'm just imagining how nice it would be to have one of those in my office just for my own amusement. The faces of insight my clients make, especially the ones where they feel flustered on their way to a breakthrough. Now, I'm curious, since the people who go to your programs, who specifically are attending? Who do you recommend is this program is made for?
Definitely. So for those coaches listening, we that's one of our main market participants. That's is people that are either transitioning into a career as coaches, or wanting to improve their coaching skills because they want different types of clients, or the leaders in organizations that are going to be part-time or full-time coaches. And so that's a big market. And then the other is just leaders within organizations that want to take more of a coaching approach to their leadership style. And so those are the main two groups that we constantly see in our programs.
It sounds like for managers in particular, this would be really powerful work, and it probably is the kind of work that shifts the culture, not just those one-on-one interactions with the people they oversee. For the managers who do come, what are some of the impacts they report back? I imagine you hear from them a few months, year or two after. Like what are the breakthroughs they're creating in their organizations where not everybody else has taken this program as well?
Definitely. Well, one is one of the funky things that happens with a SCARF model is that it becomes a verb, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm feeling scarfed, right? And so I'll explain a little bit what the SCARF model is, because we unconsciously or consciously can trigger a threat and reward state through these 5 domains, and SCARF stands for these 5 domains, which is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And so as we unconsciously sort of trigger some of these, domains, I might be a very certainty-driven person. And, as a manager, you may call me into the office and say, well, you know what, I need this delivered by tomorrow, go. And the person that, it's very certainty-driven will just completely be on a threat state. Like, what do you mean? What do I have to do? Like, what are the details? Do you need a first and a second draft before the final draft? And so they'll go into this spin wheel of certainty while the manager might be very autonomy driven. So for the manager who's very autonomy driven, it's like, this is the goal, go do it. For the person that's very certainty driven, will go, I'm freaking out, because what is going to happen between this and this? Like, there are all these little steps in between. Like, I need more direction, right? And so when you start understanding these domains, you can start to, it's mostly around language. Like, you can start addressing people differently, because you might know that they're very status driven or they're very certainty driven. And so you might want to provide a little bit more of a context or detail in terms of what you're asking them to do. Even the way you ask for a meeting, right? If I walk into your office and say, Craig, can I see you in my office in 5 minutes? And I'm your boss. Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, I guess I can't say what the first thing is, but oh crap, I'll be the second.
Exactly. Like, what did I do? I'm going to be fired. Like, what? Because that's how the brain responds. The brain the brain has a bias towards threat. But if you come and say, Craig, I need to talk to you about a project that I'm looking, and I need 10 minutes with you. When is a good time for you? Right? Like, just that little change in language, it just triggered all positive scarf domains, right? Because I'm giving you status, right? I'm asking you, I'm your boss, so there's immediate status to it, but I'm asking you what works for you. So I'm building some relatedness because I'm respecting, the fact that, that just because I'm your boss, I'm not ordering you around, whatever. I'm respecting your autonomy because I'm asking what worked best for you, and not just, coming to my office in 5 minutes, right? It's like, wait, I'm working on something important. And so it's these little things that we do constantly that we don't realize we're just triggering. And so to managers and leaders, it immediately becomes a verb, and they'll be like, oh, I was scarfed by that, right? And so now they have a common language to say, oh, tell me more. Like, oh, the way you said that just really triggered my autonomy.
Before we move on from this topic, I want to find out if you can tell from our conversation so far what you think Craig's is and what you think mine is, or should we figure out our own? Our own drivers.
I'll think, but you think, you think about, a lot of people do have some preferences, and so I'd love to hear what you think yours are. I'll make a guess of myself and then see if I got it right.
Okay, great. What do you think? You want to go first, Craig, or second?
Oh, I definitely know. I also know my past partners, though. That's what's been most fun for me. So a lot of them, what is it? If I'm the autonomy one and I trigger the hell out of them, they are the certainty kind of people.
Yes.
I love texting a partner, being like, hey, I want to chat. Because to me, I operate in the positive, and I just have assumptions based on what those conversations look like. And in every relationship I've ever had, there's always been that like hump where it takes 3 of those, let's chat, and it's a positive conversation to train my partner in not entering a fear space. But maybe I just need to add a few more things. For my relationship couples, my coach who are going to listen to this, consider one of you might be more into autonomy, one of you might need certainty. Maybe bend a little, give each other what they need.
And they're both strengths, people. One of you is not wrong, right? I love that, Craig. Thanks so much for that. Although, and I'm struggling, I gotta say, because certainty, I'm not so good with the details. Social, I don't enjoy the people. Related, again, don't enjoy the people. Autonomous, maybe, but I'm hoping maybe I'm fairness driven. I don't really know. That sounds like a good thing.
Yeah, it is. And fairness is one of those tricky, but it turns out that our brain does have a mechanism for fairness built in. And so they've done some interesting research where it's called the ultimatum game, and they just basically hand out money to one person. I'll give you $100, and then that person decides how much they want to give to a stranger. And based on that, the stranger can say whether they'll keep it or not, right? Yeah. So from a rational point of view, you'll say, well, if Christopher gets $100 and decides to give Craig $1, well, that's one more dollar than I had, a minute ago. So I'll take it, right? But it turns out, no. It turns out people, anything less than like about $20 will reject the offer because they feel it's unfair, even though they didn't do anything for the money. It's just like a random thing where I'm getting, so if I get $10, I'm great because it's $10 I didn't have before, but no, people would rather reject the offer and not get less than $20 because the catch is the other person doesn't get anything either. Right. And so we have this fairness compensating mechanism where, okay, if you're not being fair to me, I'd rather not get anything, but you won't also get anything. And that way you'll sort of learn to be fair. Right. There's all these little. Yeah.
What a fun game to play. Christopher, what do you think? Should we
Yeah,
try
it's
this
called
one next
it's
year?
called the ultimatum game. If you Google it, you'll find the results. They've done all sorts of variants on the ultimatum game, but we do have this fairness, and it's not equal, right? That's the important thing about I'm sharing about fairness. It's not a 50-50 thing, right? And so, I have a relationship with a friend, he calls me 5 times and I call him one, and it's a good balance for him, right? Like that's a good balance for a friend. But I have other friends that has to be one-on-one, right? Like their fairness is more of a, oh, I've called you 3 times and you've only called me one, and they're, psyched up about that. I was like, hey, like, because to me, it's sort of like, the perception of exchange is fair, but to them it isn't. And so it's a perception of fair exchange. It's not actually just 50-50. And so that's where the nuances come in with these models. But if you ever had a partner that doesn't like surprises,
Ever? Yeah.
exactly, you have a certainty driven person, right? You're trying to take her to a surprise dinner and she's freaking out because, like, how am I going to dress? Where are you going to go? How far is it? Like, do I need to wear formal, casual? And then all of a sudden what was going to be a surprise turns into the fight. There you have a certainty driven person.
And somehow the fight is never a surprise. There's so many good things from this already. So I want to go back because you were talking about the faces of insight, and I was like, okay, so now we've got O faces, we've got I faces, but you're also pointing to, like, there's faces of unfairness, right? Aren't there faces that when you're the autonomy certainty thing come into play? Aren't there faces that Craig, from your partner, where it's like, oh, we're about to get into this? There's a tone. All right. I didn't hear what you said, but I assume I always assume.
There's a tone, and there's more facial expressions than Botox alone can handle.
Wow. We'll talk skincare next time, kids, on the coaching. But I love this ultimatum game. I also want to say, Craig, just for our relationship, our budding friendship here, is that if I had $100, I would then ask you for another $1. So that's how the fairness piece works.
To be expected.
Nice. I'm not sure that was me. How was your guess, Patricio? How'd you do?
Yeah, I would definitely guess Craig at autonomy.
Right.
And then I would put it to at relatedness in terms, because you're the host of the podcast, and so, but fairness seems also a good fit for you.
All right. Yeah, I'm somewhere on the weirdo end of the scale. I get it.
Yeah, not certainty, because you have to be very agile and adaptable in these sort of circumstances, right? In this pod, and so yeah, I can see you not needing a lot of certainty, because then you can sort of riff on whatever I'm saying, and if I say like a really crappy thing, you won't panic and you just sort of go with the flow. And so definitely certainty, I don't see it.
Yeah. In fact, I think you should test that by starting to say just crappy stuff from now on.
Yeah.
Just see
what happens. Yeah.
See how it goes. I noticed that as our time is flying by here, I noticed that I've got 1,000 questions. So I know Craig does too, but I'm taken by this thing behind you. It looks Craig's got the bar behind him, which is very on brand. I've got some art behind me and credentials. But what is this thing behind you? And if people are listening, I'm sorry you can't see it. It's quite well organized.
It's my brain on index cards. And so, and this is when I started understanding a little bit about like neuroscience, just how the brain works, especially around creative process, because your brain is going to just throw things at you when you least expect them. And so for people that are trying to find sort of like, oh, this is my creative space, the brain doesn't really work that way. And so what I ended up working on was I'll just scatter index cards all over my house. And then if I'm reading a novel, all of a sudden an insight popped up. But I'm reading. I want to continue to read, but then I would forget either the insight and then so I just have to stop reading, go and capture the insight, and so I was like, no, I need to be able to compartmentalize my time to do the things that I enjoy. Like I'm cooking. I can't just leave the cooking there because I need to write this idea or this thought or this insight. And so what ended up happening was I just put index cards all over my house. And then so every time these insights pop up, I just write them down. And and I don't have to interrupt whatever I'm doing, but I don't lose the idea. And then once a week,
kind of like me with Post-it notes.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And then just once a week, I just come and organize it in the back because some thoughts are related to projects. So this is a project right here. And so I'll just like put them in the folder of that project because it's an idea of the pop. So it's just a way of capturing the wilds of my imagination.
It feels very similar to like design thinking processes. And I know you used to work in design spaces, maybe design labs, but we always talk about the process of like exploration, expansive thinking, and dumping when inspiration hits you. So I love the idea of actually having a place to collect it. My partner might not like all those cards floating around. Maybe I'll get a small pocketbook that I can like write in briefly when they arise. That seems much more clean than that.
Yeah, no, they're all over. Like it's just index cards just all over the place. But it works for me. So,
Craig, did you want to take it, or I got a million more questions?
Well, I'm curious. So I know there's a future event on the precipice at the turn of the year. There's a summit coming up, correct? For people who might be interested in experiencing this. I don't know, is it a digital in-person summit? What is the upcoming experience people might want to take part in?
Yes, so we moved it to virtual due to COVID and those travel restrictions and whatnot. And we did that last year and it turned out really well. And so we decided to do it again this year. We're pushing back to February. We usually had it in November. It was our yearly summit. And the purpose of that summit is to present the research and the sort of HR trends that we've been looking at, and then how to address them from a research perspective. So what happens at the summit is a collaboration between organizations, researchers, and us in presenting how we've been able to create change at scale, in organizations of 1,000 people, how we've been able to improve diversity and or whatever. So we are divided into 3 areas. It's an area we call them practice areas. One is diversity and inclusion, the other one is performance, and then the other one's culture and leadership. And so looking at those 3 verticals, then we just come up with, this is what the latest science and the latest research is telling us about how to improve performance, how to increase engagement, how to there's a big topic now on the Great Resignation, right? And so how to address this whole thing. And it's basically through autonomy, right? If you look at the Great Resignation through the lens of SCARF, it has a lot to do with autonomy and how companies that are actually forcing people, like anytime that you force people to do something, the brain just goes, autonomy threat, not liking this. And so a lot of the Great Resignation has to do with very little autonomy. And probably loss of relatedness, right? Because we're all locked away. It's been hard for many people.
Yeah, a lot of people used to say out loud that they were in their job because of somebody or people that they worked with, as opposed to the job itself. And without that makes an excellent point, I think. So this is coming up in February. It's the Neuro Leadership Summit. And how do we find more? Is it still open for registration? Do you want more people to come?
Yes, it is still open for registration. Summit.neuroleadership.com. I think it's the 15th and the 16th of February. It's fully virtual. And anyone in the coaching or management leadership space is welcome. We get, there's a wide variety of even researchers, people that are just interested in, how do we work and how do we actually think as humans? And so it's one of my favorite parts of working in this organization, just attending the summit and learning for 2 days.
Well, I'm going to sign up. I want to geek out to this. This is a great preview to that conversation, and I want more, Patricio. So thank you for sharing that opportunity with us.
I also want to acknowledge, Craig, that when you lean into the camera, I can see that you really do have great skin. Nice job. Well done. We really will have that show on skincare.
It's the coaching. It helps us glow.
Give us the tips. Give us the tips.
That's not how I do it. Sorry. Patricio got me with the dabbing. Not that. Patricio, here's what I want to ask you. It's actually a pretty good question, if I can get it out. you're the guy who's in charge of education at the Neuro Leadership Institute. See, I'm getting better. So what you do is you're in charge of educating people on brain-based coaching, I'm assuming. Is there brain-based education? Are you using brain-based education principles even as you're educating people on this?
Yes, and there's a paper. It's actually quite public, and I'm happy to sort of send it as a follow-up. But you'll probably come up with it if you just Google it. We call it the AGES model of learning, and AGES stands for attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. And it's 4 attributes that contribute to a great learning experience. So attention is all about how you actually can generate attention, because if you don't pay attention to it, you're not going to learn it. But then generation speaks about if you generate your own learning and your own content around what you just paid attention to, the learning improves, right? Emotion, very important in learning. So how do you tie learning to emotions, whether it's positive or negative? We all remember the day we were, where we were at, 9/11. We all do, because it's a very powerful negative emotion that anchors the memories in the brain. And so we can all say, I was driving, or I was, sitting having coffee, whatever that was when you found out, because it's so emotionally charged that it sticks in your brain. And so when you generate experiences that have emotions, learning happens. And then spacing is very important. So you learn better if you need to study for 2 hours. You learn better if you do 1 hour, sleep, and do the other hour, or even take a 5-minute break or a 15-minute break, than if you do 2 hours in a row. And so the way we space out our learning is respecting that the brain has a limited capacity where it's going to reach diminishing returns, and then coming back to learning later actually helps with, mostly for long-term learning, right? Things that you want to remember long-term. If you want to pass a test, the cramming strategy the night before works perfectly. What's going to happen is that 3 days later, you're not going to remember a single thing. And so AGES is about long-term learning. And we use that model to design our programs.
But don't put down that cramming stuff, because that's how I got through college. So we're going to.
So did I, exactly. And it works perfect. But if you ask me, like, well, what was that? I don't remember a thing.
Well, gosh, our time it's been so valuable right up until the last moment here. And I know that Craig needs to jump, and I'm very grateful for you being here, Craig Cassie. You can find him on the internet. I understand it's very popular at craigcassey.com. Is that true? CraigCassey.com?
You got it. Or that plus JR for Instagram. That's where you get daily content, IG lives, conversations about things we talk about here and how they apply to your sex life too. So.
Yeah, a lot of brain-based sex is how never mind.
Looking that up right now.
Thank you very much, Craig, for being with us today. And if you have to jump, you have to jump. Meanwhile, Patricio, what a privilege, what a delight to have this conversation. And I want to give you sort of the last word here. So do you have a parting thought or a parting shot you'd like to share with a few listeners?
I mean, the reason I got involved with the Institute in the first place was because I was a participant first. So I found out about their program through a coach, actually, many years ago. And she said, well, this is an organization that's taking that science-based approach that you're looking for to sort of coaching, because I was looking to get some coaching skills. And it just really shifted my perspective on what it means to be not only a coach, but a leader and a manager, and how to, solve for what I think we're actually solving for is just engagement. Because when people have their own ideas, it's a lot more powerful. Like, you can tell somebody a thing for 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks later, they'll come and say, I just had this great idea. And they just repeat whatever you've been saying for 2 weeks. And you're like, I just told you that, for the last 2 weeks. But until they have their own insight, it didn't click, right? And so to me, it's just changed my perspective on how to engage with people that you're actually trying to develop, and trying to help them develop their own potential. And so for me, it's been really rewarding. So I'll leave with that thought. And maybe any questions that you may have, we have an email. It's education-north, education education-na@neuroleadership.com. So if you
Okay,
have
we better
questions,
we better do that one more time because people, they're writing or they're trying to figure it out. So
of
it's
course,
education.
it's education dash, like middle dash, NA, as in North America, NA, at neuroleadership.com.
And we have to spell it all out: neuroleadership.com, just for anybody who may not be.
I always tell them, like, just do the NLI at the end, like that's too long, but they don't listen to me. So
I'm so sorry. We'll talk more about the unfairness of your role. I'm teasing.
Exactly.
Obviously. I love that. Solving for engagement. There's been so much value today, and I cannot thank you enough for sharing all of your brilliance and your experience with us today. That's Patricio Ramal. The Neuro Leadership Summit is in February of 2022, and you can go and find more information by going to summit.neuroleadership, again, got to type it all out, .com, summit.neuroleadership.com. Is that correct? And other than that,
we also have a blog. We we run webinars on Fridays. They're free to attend.
Wow.
Some of those webinars, David Rock will be leading those webinars. And so there's a lot of resources on our website. If you're, somebody curious about the space, if you're somebody into the science, and it's one of the things that I love about this organization, because we're not stingy with sharing what we know and what we learn about, humans.
It is just so great to be with you, and thank you for being so generous with your time with us, but also so much information, so much available. I'm very excited about the summit and very excited to learn more by going to your website, neuroleadership.com. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for the great work you've done, and thanks for that beautiful organized thing behind you. I'm very impressed and excited to consider creating my own. All right. My dear listener, that's another edition of the Coaching Show, where each week we bring you people out on the cutting edge, people you need to know about, or people who are just plain interesting in the field of coaching. I thank you for being with us. You can find it here on Accomplishment Media or wherever your fine podcasts are available. My unending gratitude to Patricio Ramal and the fine folks at neuroleadership.com. And I thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
That's it for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Coaching Show. We will talk to you next week.